You see, none of it was real. It was illusion. Your art, your science, it was all a nightmare. Now it's done. Finished.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid.
There is no going back. Our enemy pushes us on and on and on. And until we're strong enough or can find Earth and get help, we can never stop or turn
People
away
should not be
or look
afraid
back.
of their governments.
It's hard to
Governments should be
find
afraid of
moral
their
high
people.
ground when we're all standing in the mud.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Choice is an illusion created between those with power and those who have it.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome with kindness and love, with transparency to the transcendental, to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the God Above God.cam. This is your weekly dose of metaphysical and mental hormones, that spiritual enema we all need so much. This is the only authentic weekly radio program on Gnosticism, the Gnostics, and Gnosis, as well as their brethren in the esoterica and their ardent allies in free thinking.
You and I, we have a higher calling.
We sly away from scholarly pontification and definitely stay away from New Age babble. We take the middle path of serene godly wisdom while threading the dangerous needle into the hurricane eye of human nature itself. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. This is your life. Don't play hard to get. This is a dream of you, a smoke ship on the horizon. I am, and I am Abraxas, the terrible god above God as the ancients knew him, worn on so many medallions and gems as protection, because the truth of the all will set you free, but often free from sanity as well. I am also the name of a Santana album, the seal that protected the Knights Templar treasures and cursed the church for centuries, the origin of the word abracadabra, and whose gematria sum means 365, or complete totality, pure totality.
Maybe he's anti-God, bringing darkness instead of light.
But in less than totality, and I mean much less than totality, I speak to thee in my mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor from some makeshift studio in the webwork of steel and cement that is Chicago. And we are the Gnostics, those veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the controls to the heart of the sun. We are Johnny Cash Bodhisattvas, who boogie like urban Shivas, with one hand beckoning those who wish spiritual and mental freedom, while with the other giving the bird to the vultures of orthodoxy.
Is it some devil that crawls inside of you?
We are the revenge of the myth, who now rage against heaven. We house the incorruptible seed of Seth, that third son of Adam and Eve, the first and prototypical knower of the unknown, and reoccurring savior in such Gnostic sagas as the Holy Book of the Invisible Spirit and the Apocalypse of Adam. And Seth, from the Hebrew for appointed, is the eternal champion who keeps parachuting from the eternal realm of bar below and basically into our imagination in order to reboot correctly our Hermes creativity and Samaritan compassion.
Good day, number 6.
Number what?
6. For official purposes, everyone has a number. Yours is number 6.
I am not a number. I am a person.
An example of his night-tail mission can be found in the Nag Hammadi Library's second treatise of the great Seth, that says, "For I, Seth, came downward, no one saw me, for I was altering my shapes, changing from form to form. And therefore, when I was at their gates, I assumed their likeness, for I passed them by quietly, and I was viewing the places, and I was not afraid, nor ashamed, for I was undefiled. And I was speaking with them, mingling with them through those who are mine, and trampling on those who are harsh to them with zeal, and quenching the flame. And I was doing all these things because of my desire to accomplish what I desired by the will of the Father above.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
Yes, Seth comes to remind us that we don't belong in this world we did not make, a bungle in the jungle universe where everything on every level devours everything else. To help us remember that our Elysian fields, our luminous peace, begins when our Renaissance hearts are completely unchained from the bonds of ignorance, bigotry, and complacency, but are still only launching pads back up the same heaven Seth airdrop from. That place beyond all that is and all that isn't, also called the pleroma, the circuitry of the mind of the true Godhead, the holy depth and the silence, the everlasting light-filled choir of the aeons and luminaries, and the ultimate, undiluted, and perfect consciousness that we are meant to partake in.
A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
But until then, until we fully awaken and awaken our brothers and sisters, we remain down here in the Canoma, the emptiness we now reside in illusions and delusions of fluffy bunny suburban fantasies and credit scores and touchscreen yuppie false idols that, in the end, are just soul-castrating distractions.
Things you own end up owning you.
This is the black iron prison of Philip K. Dick, but the bars have been painted in calf gold and dollar green.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
So I hope you're finished polishing the bars, hosing down monkey feces that are nothing but the demons of your guilty past, and doing stupid pet tricks for the powers and principalities that have paid admittance with your own borrowed time and own divine spark, that have come to see you for their own vampiric amusement.
We're all monkeys.
To them, as to so many of their human slaves that call themselves our families and leaders, we're just apes, wandering back and forth in our cells in that waking sleep Gurdjieff wrote about, that existential drunkenness the Gnostic Jesus speaks about in the Gospel of Thomas, in those mind-forged manacles William Blake lamented about. I hope you're ready to begin breaking out as Seth breaks in, and in essence we become one and the same when we unite in the Valentinian bridal chamber. Savior and saved, revealer and revealed, soaked in wholeness and, yes, transparent to the transcendental. We become ourselves, our true selves. One bar at a time we bend, one lock we pick while they're not watching, using the keys of Gnosis the Pharisees think they hid from us.
As long as the Matrix exists, the human race will never be free.
And in this eternal now, we get closer to our escape from our cages by discussing planetary types and the failure of modern astrology.
Mama, Vicky is an astrologer.
I don't believe in that sort of thing personally. Astronomy is one of the many tools of the devil.
Our astral guest is Tony Cartledge, author of Planetary Types, The Science of Celestial Influence, as well as contributing writer for The Gnostic, Conscious Living, and Wellbeing International. For more information on Tony, please visit his website, planetarytypes.cam.au.
Let me have your attention for a moment.
You see, my beloved truth seekers, modern astrology, although ironically almost as popular as it was in ancient times, has been curdled by New Age blueballing, complicated by centuries of competing arcane schools, and lacerated by the brute fingering of an increasingly jihadist scientific world. but Tony offers a novel method that draws upon both ancient esotericism and contemporary science to create an accurate and elementary approach to astrology. It combines traditional planetary archetypes and modern physiological types determined by the dominance of individual endocrine glands.
What the hell is this?
It also heavily draws from the conscious expanding orgasms of George Gurdjieff, Peter Ouspensky, and Rodney Collin, and their body of ideas called the Fourth Way. In essence, Planetary Types is a practical, scientific system any one of us can undertake to facilitate self-knowledge in our crusade for wholeness.
I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use.
To wit, or in my case to witless, what Tony argues is that astrology just doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny and very often to serious occult scrutiny either. It's gotten a mile long and an inch thin, like so many other lamprey traditions without a real core. Heck, even C.G. Jung, who tested and considered all forms of mysticism, thought astrology was as useless as a satyr prostitute outside of Scotland. So Tony proposes a remedy by using planetary types, a logical scheme verifiable in studies that combines astronomy, geomagneticism, mathematics, human chemical fluctuations, and psychoanalytical insights. Beyond his case and revealing how you can find your own planetary type, the book is a creme de la money shot creme overview of the history of astrology and its evolution to astronomy, as well as its breakthroughs and problems and solutions, culminating with, well, Tony's own book.
Congratulations. You are now a religious icon.
Personally, I think that understanding the effects of heavenly bodies just makes common emo sense when you think about it. After all, if our little moon can dictate the tides of the oceans and menstrual cycles, don't you think the aggregate energies of our vast solar system can influence our moods, our personas, our very biology itself? Don't you think they might bend the pliable surface of time, perhaps? Or am I being followed by a moon shadow while drinking moonbeams again?
Did you lose your mind all of a sudden, or was it a slow, gradual process?
And of course the ancients already knew this, practicing astrology as early as 4000 BC. Its genesis more than likely Mesopotamian. Away from city light pollution and Hulu.com and Facebook, our ancestors couldn't avoid studying the firmaments, the movement and effects of their wanderers, as they were called, many believing they were actual divine beings, or for the more nomadic, the representation of divinity itself. They saw the stars and planets as the actual layers of reality that, if read correctly, could provide information about personality, human affairs, and other terrestrial matters.
I love humans. All of us seeing patterns in things that aren't there.
There were others who believed in the theory of correspondence, which states that man and heaven are connected, as everything is connected. In other words, the skies were actually a mirror to ourselves and the surrounding environment. The movement of the constellations was the movement of our fate down on Earth. It's the old as above so below maxim that is really getting abused these days by every goth neo-pagan who gets a Reed tattoo and reads a spell from a Llewellyn book.
Okay, we need to divide and conquer.
And again, astrology spread into many schools and many lands, from ancient India to pre-Columbian America, with the Mayans and the Aztecs and their literally heart-wrenching religions. And what's interesting is that there's always been detractors like Hellenistic skeptics, church authorities, and medieval Muslim astronomers. The great Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus, when not dissing the Gnostics, attacked astrology on the grounds it diminished planetary divinity by applying an astrological meaning to trivial human interests. Guess some things never change, my beloved truth seekers.
It's all part of the plan.
Although such giants as Galileo, Copernicus, and Kepler still held on to astrology, their core findings eroded it into a pseudoscience, although we still cling on to astrology because, let's face it, most of us want to believe in something bigger than our own heroic potential, in some harmony of the cosmos with princes on stars and making wishes that will never come true. And we just can't help wanting to know the future as much as we pretend we want to know our own inner galaxies.
Denial is the most predictable of all human responses.
As for the Gnostics, it is documented they knew their astrology as well as any Chaldean Magi stud, but for much different reasons. To the Gnostics, the planets and the stars were demonic gatekeepers or glowing zookeepers called authorities that oversaw the wildlife parks of Yaldabaoth, that ancient of days himself.
So you can give your heart to Jesus, but your ass belongs to God.
So the Gnostics studied their patrolling schedules and weaponry, devising rituals, spells, and meditations to not only shield themselves of the free will destroying radiation of these Skynet satellites, but actually find a way to take astral flights and fool the wanderers in order to reach the static heavens of the aeons. One of them, the Ogdoad, where in some accounts Sophia and the redeemed brother of Jehovah, Sabaoth, oversee the rescue operation of humanity.
All that is visible must grow beyond itself and extend into the realm of the invisible.
You can find the Gnostic ceremonies and evocations to defeat the stellar lords in such texts as the Book of Jehu, the Pistis Sophia, the Discourse of the Eighth and Nine, and several others. Even in the Bible, St. Paul finds himself stranded like a European traveler in the third heaven. And you know he was shooting for something higher, my beloved truth seekers. In the Nag Hammadi libraries, the Apocalypse of Paul, he actually does climb higher, adventuring through a starry realm of snarky angels who do horrible things to souls that failed in their dimensional Logan's Run.
Your suffering will be legendary, even in hell.
But enough of my drivel. Tony Cartledge on Planetary Types, in order we may take one more bar off our cage, one more link to our mind-forged manacles. The truth will set you free, often from your own sanity. And if not, it just might piss you off for a little while. But you'll either get over it, or just keep soiling your cage with more of your guilty past. Death spares none but the tiger.
Don't worry, number 6. You'll be cured. I'll see to it. No more nightmares. If you have so much as a bad dream, you will come, whimpering, to tell it to me. Whimpering!
This is the AM by interview, and with us we have Tony Cartledge to discuss his new book, Planetary Types, The Science of Celestial Influence. How are you doing today, Tony?
Very well, Miguel. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on. Well, why don't we begin with the problem of modern astrology? Tony, why do you believe that current astrology cannot be considered an objective science?
Those who have studied astrology scientifically and empirically haven't come up with, well, the evidence is not forthcoming. A lot of the people who have studied astrology have been not necessarily critics or skeptics, but people who had a strong interest in astrology and were actually looking for the evidence to support, their interest. Unfortunately, the evidence was not forthcoming. People like Rudolf Schmidt, who has a website on astrology and science, details over 600 tests that have been done for astrology, none of which has produced any serious evidence that astrology has a basis in physics. So that's its major downfall right there.
And what would you say are the prerequisites for astrology being valid, or at least recognized by the scientific community?
Well, some kind of evidence, some kind of strict scientific investigation, and I think it would have to correspond to sort of known laws in physics. I think that's what I've tried to do in the book, to try and marry the two and see if there's any possibility that celestial influences could be supported by science. There was a chap called Michel Gauquelin, a French scientist, who did come up with some kind of a small window of evidence for the influence of the planets on personality. However, his results are disputed by many. I thought it was an interesting place to start, so that's where I began my investigations on the back, piggybacking on Gauquelin's investigations.
But it must be hard even understanding modern astrology, because as you write, aren't there just so many schools of it today? We don't even know where it begins and ends?
Exactly. And a lot of it contradicts each other. A lot of the interpretation is very subjective, and a lot of it, I guess, corresponds to what the hardcore skeptics would call cold reading. Like a lot of the psychics, they say they're able to read people and get information from them from the interviews. And a lot of them say that astrology sort of succumbs to the same shortcomings.
And also, I think you write another one of the reasons there's a problem with considering astrology as science is that it has unknown origins. Nobody knows when the actual math and calculation started, right?
Exactly.
The experiment has to start somewhere, and you have to know where it started.
That's right, yeah. And there's lots of theories on the origins of astrology, but some say the zodiac has its origins in sort of seasonal times of the year, as relating to agriculture and the best time to plant and that sort of things. So everybody has an opinion about the origins of astrology, and it's hard to pin down.
But when did astrology become sort of a tool for understanding personality? You have like this quote that says, even in the 3rd century, Plotinus attacked astrology because on its grounds it diminished planetary divinity by applying an astrological meaning to trivial human interests. So do we know at what point astrology began to be used for your own inner psychology instead of predicting the future, if you would?
Well, I think it came to its fore during the Renaissance. Up until then, astrology was usually applied to groups or kings rather than sort of the man on the street, so to speak. So the rise of the individual, the focus on the individual during the Renaissance philosophy, brought astrology sort of into the marketplace, I guess, so that everybody could have their fortune and their character told through looking at the heavens.
And you also mentioned that the two main pillars of astrology are planetary types and the power of the 4 celestial angles. What exactly are the 4 celestial angles, Tony?
The 4 celestial angles, whatever's happening on the horizon, whatever's happening directly above, whatever's happening on the opposite horizon, and whatever's happening at the nadir. These, if you look at a horoscope, it's basically a circle. On the left hand, sort of right angle is sunset. 12 o'clock noon is right above us, and sunrise is on the left hand side, sunset is on the right hand side, and below us is the 4th angle. So these were used by Gauquelin in his investigations. They're also established by Kepler, Johannes Kepler, who was responsible for the laws of planetary motion that science still uses today, but also he was what I call an objective astrologer. He sort of got rid of most of the unnecessary chaff in astrology, and he sort of boiled down astrology. It was very similar to Gauquelin's, using the planets and these four celestial angles.
And even if Kepler still used astrology, wasn't the beginning of people with Kepler and Galileo and the Enlightenment, is that when astrology began to just kind of diminish into pseudoscience, like alchemy, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few sort of mavericks like Kepler who sort of kept possibly this core truth of astrology alive, but mostly a lot of the nonsense gets passed on from generation to generation.
And why do you think astrology is still so popular and has always been so popular? Is it just human nature to want to know the future?
Well, I think there's something very attractive in this notion of as above, so below, which is, crops up in lots of esoteric systems. And we would like it to be true. I think, this idea that we're connected to the heavens, or everything is connected in some way. And astrology satisfies that urge. In fact, I mean, that really was one of the reasons why I started this investigation, was I wanted to see whether this idea of as above, so below could, have some reflection in fact, in science, in physics. There are also lots of other reasons that astrology is attractive. There's a sort of a therapy aspect of astrology too, where, the astrologer is seen to have some sort of unique insight into someone's character that they can't see for themselves, and so, that also is attractive to a lot of people.
Tony, could you tell us about Gurdjieff's fourth way and how it helps us understand planetary types?
Well, I've been had a long-standing interest in Gurdjieff for many years. I think he had one of the most sophisticated and remarkable esoteric systems. He also used the idea of type quite a lot. I think I say in the book, there's no real indication that Gurdjieff's types are the same as mine. But the idea of sort of being able to represent people as archetypes featured quite a lot in his teachings. I think he was also I like your idea of heretical spirituality, and Gurdjieff was one of the true heretics of the 20th century. And probably, he's number one on my list of heretical, maverick spiritual teachers.
Could you explain a little bit what exactly is the fourth way?
At its core, the fourth way has the same aim as most other spiritual teachings, is to wake people up. And Gurdjieff had rather a unique way of trying to wake people up. The fourth way has lots of similarities to other spiritual esoteric traditions like Buddhism and Sufism. This idea of mindfulness, or trying to develop one's attention to be awake in the world, from moment to moment. That to me is like the core, the bedrock of the fourth way. He had a very elaborate cosmology about the way the universe works also. He used the idea of vibrations and musical symbology and this idea of octaves. But basically, the core idea of the fourth way is helping people to wake up and trying to get us to see that we're asleep and how we need to wake up.
And is the culmination of the fourth way something like Jung, where you simply become a whole human being? You become at peace, or what is the culmination, or some transcendence of some sort?
Yes, so trying to, first of all, the first aim of the fourth way was trying to get us to see ourselves, which is to see ourselves clearly and objectively, which is difficult enough in itself. But ultimately, yes, I guess that it would have the same aim as Buddhism, as Sufism, and possibly as Jung tried to get us to be this whole person, this unique whole individual.
And how did Gurdjieff view astrology? Did he utilize it at all?
He said that yes, he believed that the planets influence life on Earth. He had some unique views that on astrology. Is that he made a distinction between one's essence and one's personality. Essence is what is the character we're born with, but personality is what we acquire through living in certain cultures. And culture changes from country to country, and customs change. But one's essence is the physical characteristics one's born with, and the inner character one is born with. So we said astrology affects essence, not personality, which is something quite different from what most other people were teaching.
Yeah, I think you had there was the personalities where the functional personality, the false personality, and then would be the true personality is one's essence.
Yeah, the idea is that the personality is kind of this thick coating over essence, and very few influences actually, even cultural influences actually reach one's essence. So the idea is you try to make personality permeable so that real influences can reach the core of who we are.
And Tony, how does Pythagorean mysticism and harmonic principles unlock the secret of our bodies, which in essence are tuned to the solar system itself? I like that quote of him. You said that a stone is just frozen music.
Oh, yeah. This is another area that's sort of very attractive, at least to my mind. And I'm not really sure whether there's something that can be proven, although there are lots of studies using, sort of reflecting scientific principles that reflect musical principles also. But I'm not really sure if there's something that can be kind of proven or demonstrated scientifically. But it's a very attractive idea that the universe is kind of built on harmonic musical principles. So the idea is that, of course, everything at its core is vibration, even down to the molecular and the atomic level. So it seemed a way to tie everything together. So the planets produce some sort of frequencies, even though they're over long periods. So I thought, well, let's try and match the frequencies, whatever frequencies the planets might produce, to frequencies within the human body. And there are some harmonic scientists, if you like, that believe that all the processes and structures in the human body also have frequencies. So if there was a way to match these frequencies to frequencies from the heavens, then this might be a way to link as above to below.
Yeah, because you write that Rodney Collin said our bodies are basically dishes tuned to the planets. We're receiving these vibrations, right?
Yeah, that was a very good. I thought he had a very good way of expressing it. Rodney Collin was a student of Ouspensky's, who was a student of Gurdjieff's, and he had his own unique expression of the fourth way. He actually tried to had a rather ambitious plan to unite all the fourth way principles and many other esoteric principles to the known scientific principles of his day. Some of it was successful, some of it was not so successful. Gurdjieff also tried to do this back in his era, which was roughly the turn of the century, in the 1920s and 30s. And he tried to relate what he understood, the esoteric principles that make up the way the universe works with the known scientific principles of his day. Unfortunately, we know some of the science has been superseded now, so he got a few things wrong, but I thought it was one of the few very effective attempts to try and marry science and spirituality, which is a particular interest of mine.
And what about the importance of the octave? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Gurdjieff believed that the structure of the universe was built on octaves, and that the idea of different levels, like life on Earth compared to life in the heavens, was simply a matter of different octaves. And of course, octaves are built roughly of the same notes. They have the same structure. You have a C on one level will produce resonance on the note C on other levels. So I thought this was a very unique way of uniting the heavens to man. And Rodney Collin went a little bit further, and he drew up lots of tables of different sciences that could be expressed in octaves, one of which was the periodic table of elements. And he said it corresponded very closely to this idea of octaves. No, there are lots of parallels. There are lots of interesting parallels between this musical harmonic science and real science as it's being done today.
Yeah, what I found fascinating is that what you wrote about bioacoustics, which isn't it basically that through wave frequencies we can heal our very bodies?
That's right. Yeah, that was another interesting thing I came across. This woman, Shari Edwards, is able to produce sounds that have remarkable effects on the human body. And there are lots of therapies that use sound or frequencies to heal. So, there seems to be something in it.
But so far, is it not an accepted science, or where is it at these days?
I'm sure most scientists would regard it as pseudoscience. I kind of have this hope that although most pseudosciences end up in the rubbish bin, I have this hope that some sciences, alternative approaches to sciences, let's call them, will have some validity someday. And this whole idea of harmonic science shows promise, I believe.
And can you tell us about the endocrine types and other glands and how they relate to your thesis?
Well, it was Rodney Collin who made this unique link between these archetypes of astrology that have kind of endured for 2,000 years with a pioneer in the study of endocrinology, Louis Berman. He said that there were types governed by certain glands. These endocrine types bore very strong similarities to these astrological archetypes. So he posited that if there was a link between the planets and man, it was through the endocrine glands. So I tried to take what he'd introduced a little further to see if there was any link between the hormones that the glands produce and the frequencies that the planets were producing. There were lots of links. I mean, there were more links than I thought there'd be. So to me, this is the only kind of feasible link between the planets and man, something that has some reasonable basis in physics.
So could you expand a little bit more on that or give us some examples? What exactly do you mean by that? Some people are ruled by their glands, and these are tied into the heavens?
Yeah, the idea is that Louis Berman introduced this idea that the endocrine glands produce a type that is governed by the secretions of one gland. So, for instance, the anterior pituitary type is someone who is governed by, has an oversecretion of the hormones of the pituitary gland. So, for instance, the anterior pituitary type or the saturnine type produces an easily recognizable physical type. They're very tall, they have long bones, very prominent cheekbones, and they have a psychology that goes along with this shape. So this idea that form equals function is also something that I go to in the book. So the saturnine type is sort of very tall and imposing, and they have this leadership psychology. Many that find themselves in leadership roles. Barack Obama is a good example of the classic saturnine type. And they like to impose order. They like to impose order out of chaos. So they're looking for ways to make sense out of the world and produce a harmonious environment. That's just one type. Another good example is the maximum attraction for the saturnine type, which is the lunar type. And the lunar type is very similar to this. It's the endocrine type, the pancreatic type. The lunar type is sort of very quiet. They like to retire from the world. They're not great in social situations. They're perhaps a little bit awkward in public, but they're sort of very dependable people. They have a great attention to detail. So all of the types have these very clearly defined characteristics that one can learn and recognize.
So basically you start by their physical appearance, and then you can work your way to what kind of glandular type they are. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah. I think this is one of the clearest differences between my approach and other than, I guess, classical astrology, is that you can recognize a type by physical characteristics, and you'll find that the psychological characteristics are always there too. So I recognize types by how they look first, and then we try to identify their chief characteristics. I had a look at your website and tried to perhaps guess your type from the few photographs were there, but I wouldn't like to guess. Not enough photos to make a real sort of clear determination, so I wouldn't like to venture an opinion. But in the book there are lots of there are photographs and there are lots of examples of the type. So I think anybody can make a good start in learning how to recognise the types themselves.
Well, hopefully I'm not Saturn, since that's the demiurge. But
well, that was the one that came to mind first. But like
no.
But I wouldn't venture an opinion just based on those few photographs. Usually, I'll ask if someone wants me to determine their type. I'll try to get as many photographs as possible, or even better, a short video clip of them.
And can you give us some more examples of famous people and what they are? Maybe a couple of examples.
The martial type is usually a very easy type to spot because they're the aggressive types. In John McEnroe's a martial type. Gurdjieff was a martial type because martials are sort of very aggressive, and he had a very aggressive way of working with people. Gurdjieff, he liked to destroy their illusions, and martials will like to attack things, bring things down. Margaret Thatcher was another martial type. Mercurial types are very easy to spot. They're full of nervous energy, and they're very small and compact and have very angular features. They have very active minds, full of nervous energy, always on the go. And mercurial types are governed by the thyroid gland, which regulates heat and movement in the body. Mercurial types are very quick and nimble and dexterous. In fact, nearly every magician I've seen is a mercurial type, and they have to be because they have to move faster than the eye can follow. So it's often they're an easy type to spot. The Venusian type is someone who's governed by their parathyroids, and this sometimes gives them a very sort of large pear-shaped physiology. They're a little slower than the rest of us, but they're also very nurturing type, very charming type, and very easy to get along with. Some good examples of a Venusian type were the domestic goddess Nigella Lawson. They're very into caring for people and they're making people comfortable, and they're into food and comfort and clothes and textures and domestic wisdom, if you like.
Question is, basically, doesn't this sort of take away our free will? We are born under a certain planet, and the magnetism of the planet, as you're saying, changes or affects our glands, and that's our personality, right? What would Gurdjieff say about that? How do we get through that? Or do we use it to our advantage just by understanding ourselves?
Absolutely, you've nailed it. I think he used this idea of archetypes and discovering one's character has value in that we really have trouble seeing ourselves clearly. So sometimes we need a guide. Of course, that's why people go to such systems like astrology, is that they want to see themselves more clearly because it's so difficult to see oneself. But the more esoteric systems, I think, give us more reliable guides, and I think the planetary types is a more reliable guide into the different archetypes of who we are. So, but the idea is not to stop there, obviously, because people can get locked into, well, this is the way I am, I can't be any different. But the idea, Gurdjieff introduced the idea that we need to go beyond our essence and transcend that. But half the trouble is trying to see ourselves clearly, and I think planetary types and these kinds of archetypes can give us a clearer picture of who we are.
Now, what did Gurdjieff say once we know ourselves, how exactly do we better ourselves? I mean, obviously the ancient Gnostics believed, well, we simply have to transcend ourselves in some Buddhist schools. What would Gurdjieff say? Is it sort of a gradient into improvement, or how do we get out of our zodiac signs?
Well, I think he would agree in principle with most of the other traditions like Buddhism and Sufism, is that we have different selves. We have more concrete selves that are related to our essence and our personality, and we have greater selves or see the world as it really is. Like Buddha was one of the true heretical spiritualities, in that everything we see, or even all the esoteric systems, are all projections of the mind. So ultimately, the fourth way has the same aim as Buddhism, isn't it? Trying to see reality as it is.
In using the planets, you still only use the 7 planets that the ancients use?
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, Rodney Collin, his rule governing that was that the inner planets up to Saturn and Jupiter, their orbits all fall within the average lifespan of man, whereas the outer planets have orbits that go over 100 years. And he couldn't, there was no match between a Neptunian type and any of the endocrine glands, so I guess he figured that that's where the sort of the planets that influence character end. They end at Saturn and Jupiter. And I think he believed that the outer planets like Neptune, Uranus and Pluto govern cycles in history. Something that's very difficult to prove and establish, but there you go, that's what he thought. Plus I think this idea of 7 as some kind of significant number also probably influenced his decision.
I found it interesting, but in your book you write that Jupiter is not actually a planet, it's something else. What do you call it, a brown dwarf?
Yeah, so this is what Rodney Collin believed. I'm pretty sure that scientists these days would consider Saturn and Jupiter are both different from all the other planets in that they're gaseous planets, and the bulk of their mass is made up through gas, whereas the inner planets like Mars, Venus and Mercury and the Earth, of course, are all basically rocky planets. There's something I'd have to check whether scientists still regard Jupiter as a brown dwarf, but it's something worth looking into.
So basically, Tony, if I get your book, or if the listener gets your book, buys your book, and they read it, will they be able to find their planetary type, or do you suggest some supplementary work?
I think there's enough in the book for people with a real interest to start seeing types and sort of training themselves to see types. Absolutely. I'm always available to help people who are interested, and I'm thinking maybe of posting. If you go to the website, I have lots of examples of the types, so they're very useful, I find. And I'm also, a couple of people approached me about help with establishing their type, and I've done that for a few people, so I'm always available to help. But certainly in the book there's enough for people to start learning how to see types and discovering their own type.
And you yourself, have you become an expert? Can you walk down the street and look at somebody and by this note say, you're this type, you're this type?
Yes, although I guess I don't think in concrete terms. It sort of becomes a very quick, what I call a chemical computation. You know how you have, in the same way that chemistry works between people, you immediately like someone, you immediately have friction with someone, or you're sort of immediately ambivalent towards people you meet. And this is all the chemistry of types at work. So when I meet someone, it's kind of an instant sort of calculation or computation of their type. Very useful understanding people, the difficulty between people, this knowledge of types. I found it fascinating and useful for understanding how people get on and why some people don't get on.
Right, and that could be extremely helpful for corporations, businesses, governments. It could be It could be very helpful as a psychological tool, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things I see played out time and time again is this idea in the book of maximum attraction, is that people are always attracted to their opposite type, and that's something that's like 95 times out of 100, the people you see attracted to, as in their partner or their mate or their husband or wife, is their opposite type. It's so reliable that this is one of the things that makes me think that these types have some basis in physiology, and at one day kind of be able to establish this scientifically. Even if it turns out that because I'm doing more research and trying to establish the validity of these connections to the planets, even if that fails, I think these archetypes are so strong, and there's something intuitively sound about them, that my research will continue with the types, independent of whether they have a connection to the planets.
And what would you say is your percentage of accuracy in your testing of these planetary types?
Well, my ability to type people is pretty accurate, but the actual research I've been doing with others on establishing whether the planets actually are connected to the types, it still needs some work. I've been working with a researcher called Jeffrey Dean, who's been analysing all my statistical results, because the work in the book is based on the tests I've been doing, and they have to be analysed according to laws of statistics. So I've been working with someone who has a little better knowledge of statistics than I did, and some of my tests have been shown to be, the results are a little dubious. Some of the tests have been very promising. So what it boils down to is that I need to do further tests on these theories to find out whether we've got a very strong connection, a very strong scientific connection here.
How has both the scientific and occult community reacted to your work so far?
Well, very underwhelming at the moment. I guess some of my work falls down between cracks because it won't be necessarily appealing to astrologers, because it starts with the basis that most astrology doesn't work. If you're a hardcore scientist, a professional scientist, you're going to regard a lot of this as pseudoscientists, unless I can come up with real facts that can be borne out by statistics. So I'm kind of perched somewhere in the middle between science and pseudoscience, I guess, and the outcome won't be determined until I've got some real bedrock statistical evidence here. I would say people who are interested in finding out the results of the tests would keep watching the blogs that are attached to the website, because I'm going to post some of the results up this weekend. One of the interests that's came out of the studies I've been doing is this idea of science and spirituality in general, and how I guess I regard myself as kind of a spiritual skeptic, is that I think there's lots that science can tell us about spirituality, or I think they're not necessarily in opposition to each other. I'd like to, I'm thinking about it. My next book's probably going to be on this idea of how skepticism and critical thinking actually are useful for the spiritual path, rather than things that tend to kill spiritual ideas. So this whole idea of critical thinking and spirituality is very interesting to me also.
And it's not something that's what you might say new. I mean, people like Carl Jung or Gurdjieff or William James, weren't they trying to do that? They were trying to actually put the science and the occult together where it was verifiable?
Yes. And it's been done sometimes with more success than others. But Gurdjieff also said that one of the major failings of the 20th century was people's gullibility and their willingness to believe things without investigating them. So, and that to me is also a very attractive idea, is that we tend to believe things very easily without subjecting them to experiment. And Gurdjieff was very big on verifying things for oneself. And I think if you go to the core of most spiritual disciplines like Buddhism and Sufism and Advaita, this idea that you can't just pay lip service to your spiritual beliefs. You have to verify whether they're true. And in fact, the Dalai Lama went so far as to say that if science proved Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism would have to change. And I think that's a very healthy attitude towards spirituality and science, because really science delivers us with facts. And I think a true esoteric system, its ideas should not stand in opposition to science. It can't contradict what science tells us about the world.
And the term junk science, what is that? Is that simply when the agenda comes before the science?
Yeah, junk science. Lots of people use junk science to... Look, advertising uses junk science all the time. They'll say scientifically proven products, because people like this idea that science is behind, because they have this intuition that science delivers them with facts, bedrock facts and truth. So people use junk science to justify some of the craziest ideas.
You have politicians do that too. Everybody does it to some extent.
Absolutely. This studies show, ... fill in the gap, statistics show,
Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Tony. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing planetary types.
Look, it's been my pleasure, Miguel, and thanks very much for having me.
And there you have it, my beloved True Seekers. Planet Types and the Failure of Modern Astrology. From the book, Planetary Types, The Science of Celestial Influence, by Tony Cartledge. Tony is also contributing writer for The Gnostic, Conscious Living, and Wellbeing International. Pretty smooth interview all the way from Australia to Chicago. Oh, and again, for more information on Tony, please visit his website, planetarytypes.cam.au. And it seems I may be a Saturn planetary type, the stellar body often connected to Jehovah. You're always one step ahead of me, Yaldi Baldi. But not much else I can add, and it's only going to be drivel in the end anyway. Beyond the interview, buy Tony's book or check out his website to find your own planetary type. Send him an email and he'll be glad to give you a hand, perhaps place you in one of his studies. If his research is sober, then we've discovered another valuable but simple tool for self-knowledge, one of the main dishes in the feast that is Gnosis. And with this and everything else, test the waters yourself, trust but verify, and, like I always say, find your own mystery that works for you. In the end, my beloved True Seekers, it certainly is possible for the sacred and the secular to work together. And much of science is in essence just catching up to the deeper truths to existence the ancient mystics and magicians already knew about. They just used a different language, a different mythology, and had different tools at their disposition. One of the goals of Aeon Byte is to bridge the gap between the sacred and the secular with Gnostic truths and the wisdom of the ages. Not that anyone really cares about this little atom podcast in a nuclear war between theism and atheism, fundamentalism and humanism, but I should give it my best Greek Academy try. After all, Abraxas has never wanted to be the finger pointing at the moon, but the finger up your arse to show that you, all of us, are basically so full of you-know-what, it's risen to our eyes, and we don't even have the ability to look at the moon or the constellations anymore. Thus, we can't fight the rulers and authorities who tax us of our free will, find those pathways to the Ogdode, or even know what is valuable inside of us. time for all of us to psychically and spiritually cleanse our soul bowels. We're all filthy monkeys in a cage, aren't we? Or that's what we've been told to believe. We must remember that our true nature is to be free, to be unbound, to be higher than the gods, and without the rigid orbits like the wanderers themselves. We must write our own gospel and live our own myth like the perennial heretics did, from Simon Magus to William Blake, or else Jehovah will assign a ghostwriter and a stand-in for us. I think I'll end your hostel-like torture by quoting Nietzsche, who put it better but similarly when he said, "The individual has always struggled to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." Oh wait, I'm also supposed to do the highlight thing before we end your misery. Please join the Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio Fan Club on Facebook, subscribe to our blog, download over 160 programs on the best and the blasphemous when it comes to the esoterica that you'll find on the web, and donate if you can to keep this heresy going that is going to get better as we reach 4 years, with many surprises coming in the future. And I think that's it. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road has ended, the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.
I blame you for the moonlit sky and the dream that died with the eagle's flight. I blame you.